Professor Oded Lifshitz from the Department of Archaeology and Ancient Near Eastern Cultures at Tel Aviv University is inviting you to join him to a journey following those who composed the historical descriptions in the Hebrew Bible.
The Untold Story of the Kingdom of Judah, Part D. The Untold Stories of the Kingdom of Israel. Chapter 7. What was told and what was left untold about Jehu's rebellion, the elimination of the Omrides, and the ascension of the Nimshides. The final 120 years in the history of the Kingdom of Israel between 842 and 722 BCE were a turbulent period, both geopolitically and internally, in which the kingdom reached its final high point mainly during the reign of Jeroboam II, who reigned between 786 and 746 BCE, before the rise of the Assyrian Empire and the reign of Tiglath-Pileser III, who reigned between 745 and 727 BCE, and Israel's rapid decline towards destruction, which occurred over a few short years in the second half of his reign and continued into the reigns of the Assyrian kings who followed him. This period followed the peak days of the Omride rule, during which Israel established itself as a strong and central kingdom in the region, and begins at a clear and known point in time depicted by various sources in which three different royal houses in the three kingdoms were either completely or almost completely eliminated. King Hazael's rebellion in Aram Damascus resulted in the elimination of the dynasty over there. Simultaneously, Jehu's rebellion in Israel and the complete elimination of the Omride Dynasty led to the killing of many of the sons of the king of Judah and the complete or almost complete elimination of the house of David at the hands of Athaliah, the new queen who had established herself on the throne in Jerusalem. What did biblical historiographers know about all these decisive and dramatic events? What were their sources of information regarding these one-off events in which the histories of Israel and Judah intersected so unexpectedly? This chapter in the history of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah is one of the best examples for understanding the limitations of biblical descriptions based on ancient prophetic sources, which were incorporated into the description around 200 years later. The existence of extra-biblical sources to the events of these years, which include an Assyrian inscription by King Shalmaneser III, who reigned between 858 and 824 BCE, and an Aramaic stele, apparently erected by Hazael, king of Aram Damascus, and found in Tel Dan, allow us not only to reconstruct the course of events free from the biblical interpretation, but also to return to the biblical description and test it using a series of new and different questions which we couldn't ask before. This is another example of an untold story because the biblical authors relied on sources of information that are problematic in terms of historical reliability. Sources that underwent a long period of oral transmission before being written down from a great distance of time and then molded by new and different literary and ideological needs. At the core of the discussion of Jehu's rebellion is a long prophetic story that can be found in the second book of Kings, chapter 9, verse 1 to chapter 10, verse 28, which consists of at least two different and partially overlapping prophetic stories, and which describes the ascension to the throne of Jehu, the commander of the army, and the extinction of the Omride Dynasty and the cult of the Baal in Israel. The story of Jehu's rebellion, as it is presented in the book of Kings, ends the cycle of the prophecy and its fulfillment exactly in accordance with the prophecies of calamity delivered to the house of Ahab. However, the historical reconstruction that emerges from the Deuteronomistic historiographic adaptation of the prophetic story that served as its source is substantially different from the reconstruction that emerges from the extra biblical sources on the history of this period. The starting point for the entire story and the event that set in motion the entire chain of events that followed occurred shortly after 845 BCE, when Hadadezer, the king of Aram Damascus, who led the regional alliance in which the kingdom of Israel was an active, important member, passed away. Hadadezer was replaced by King Hazael, who, at least according to the biblical description, was the commander of his army. An Assyrian summary inscription details the death of Hadadezer and the ascension to the throne of Hazael, who is defined there as the son of no one. That is, as someone who is not of the royal family and as such had no rightful claim to the throne. According to the inscription, Hazael gathered the army of Damascus and faced the Assyrians, who dealt him a heavy defeat. Clearly, the Assyrians knew of the change of dynasties in Aram. The biblical historiographer also knew about this and described this episode as a complete fulfillment of God's words to Elisha in 1 Kings 19, verses 15 to 17, and I'm quoting. And Yahweh said to him, Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Aram. And Jehu, the son of Nimshi, you shall anoint to be a king over Israel. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat, of Abel Mecholah, you shall anoint to be prophet in your place. And him who escaped from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu slay. And him who escapes from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha slay. Elijah's words are fulfilled with Elisha's actions, which are described in the second book of Kings, chapter 8, verses 7 to 15, according to which Elisha arrived in Damascus while Ben-Hadad was ill. When the king learned that the man of God had arrived, he sent Hazael with an offering of, I'm quoting, all kinds of goods of Damascus, 40 camels loaded, and he asked Elisha, shall I recover from this sickness? It is interesting to compare the question asked by the Aramaic king Ben-Hadad to the Israelite prophet Elisha to the identical question asked by the Israelite king Ahaziah, who, according to the second book of Kings, chapter 1, verse 2, told his messengers to, I'm quoting, go inquire of Baal Zvuv, the god of Ekron, whether I shall recover from this sickness. Elisha's answer to Hazael contains a play on words in verse 10. In Hebrew, the order of Elisha to Hazael is Lech emor lo chaye tichye. It can have a double meaning, which was indeed also written in a different way in the Ketiv and the Keri of the Hebrew Bible. Both, go tell him, you will certainly live, but Yahweh has shown me that he shall certainly die, or go tell him, you will not live, since Yahweh had shown me that he shall certainly die. Following this, Elisha prophesies that Hazael will rise to the throne in Ben-Hadad's place and describes to him the great victories he will have over Israel. This is in verses 11 to 13. Because I know the evil that you will do to the children of Israel, their stronghold will you set on fire, and their young men will you slay with the sword, and will dash their children, and rip up their women with child. And Hazael said, "But what is this servant a dog, that he should do this great thing?" And Elisha answered, "Yahweh has shown me that you shall be king over Aram." This description implies that, in accordance with the Assyrian text, the biblical description also shows that Hazael was not a natural candidate for the kingship and was therefore surprised by Elisha's words. We can assume that he was a successful commander of the Aramean army, and like other army commanders in the ancient Near East and in Israel, he used his power and his proximity to the king in order to rise to power. Hazael returned to the king with a message that he will recover from his illness. I'm quoting. He departed from Elisha and came to his master, who said to him, "What did Elisha say to you?" And he answered, "He told me that you would certainly recover." However, according to the end of the story in verse 15, on the tomorrow he took the coverlet and dipped it in water and spread it over his face till he died. And Hazael became king in his stead. The destruction of the dynasty of kings in Aram Damascus resulted in the end of the alliance between Hadadezer and Joram, the son of Ahab, which together with Hamat and other kingdoms succeeded in stopping the Assyrian advance in a series of wars fought in northern Syria in the years 849, 848, and 845 BCE. Hazael, immediately after his accession to the throne, seems to have attacked Israel either to force Joram to renew the alliance or possibly to take advantage of the broken alliance and Israel's weakness to conquer territories in the Gilead that were in dispute between the two kingdoms. This is the starting point for the entire prophetic story, when, according to 2 Kings chapter 9, verse 14, and Joram, with all Israel, had been on guard at Ramoth Gilead against Hazael, king of Aram. Alongside Joram stood King Ahaziah, who had just ascended to the throne in Judah that same year in 842 BCE. Ahaziah was the son of Jehoram, king of Judah, and Athaliah, who was likely the daughter of Omri. After her father's death, Athaliah grew up in the court of her brother Ahab, who probably arranged her marriage to the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah. If this reconstruction is indeed correct, then Joram, the son of Ahab, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, were cousins. This context frames our understanding of the rest of the story of Jehu's rebellion and the complete elimination of the house of Ahab. This is the Deuteronomistic name for the house of Omri, the Omride Dynasty, including their relatives, Ahaziah's brothers. This familial context also helps us understand Ahaziah's joining Joram, the son of Ahab, in the war against Hazael in Ramoth Gilead, and why, after Joram was wounded in battle and went to Jezreel to rest and heal, Ahaziah, the son of Jehoram, king of Judah, went down to see Joram, the son of Ahab, in Jezreel because he was sick. This is in 2nd book of Kings, chapter 8, verse 29. Combining this story with a continuation of the description in the 2nd book of Kings, chapter 10, verses 13 and 14, suggests that he came to visit Joram together with 42 members of his family, who are defined as the brothers of Ahaziah, king of Judah. Given this context, the prophetic story in the 2nd book of Kings, chapter 9 and 10, tells how the prophet Elisha sent one of the sons of the prophets to Ramoth Gilead to anoint Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi family, as a king. The prophecy is also a clear commandment, and I'm reading from chapter 9, verses 7 to 10. "And you shall strike down the house of Ahab your master, that I may avenge on Jezebel the blood of my servants the prophets, and the blood of all the servants of Yahweh. For the whole house of Ahab shall perish, and I will cut off from Ahab every male, bond or free, in Israel. And I will make the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha the son of Achiah. And the dogs shall eat Jezebel in the territory of Jezreel, and none shall bury her. This instruction lies at the heart of Jehu's bloody rebellion, which systematically, cunningly, and cruelly eliminated the entire royal house in Israel and destroyed the cult of Baal. There is nothing else in the biblical description that is told about the 28 years of Jehu's reign, with the exception of the comment that we have in the second book of Kings, chapter 10, verse 32 and 33, according to which, and I'm quoting, "In those days, Yahweh began to cut off parts of Israel. Hazael defeated them throughout the territory of Israel, from the Jordan eastward, all the land of Gilead, the Gadites and the Reubenites and the Manashites, from Aroer, which is by the valley of the Arnon, and the Gilead and the Bashan." According to the description in the Hebrew Bible in the second book of Kings, chapter 9, verse 16, Jehu arrived in Jezreel, and I'm quoting, "For Joram lay there, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, had come down to visit Joram. Joram and Ahaziah set out to meet him in their chariots and encountered him in the property of Naboth the Israelite." According to chapter 9, verses 22 to 24, the kings didn't know what the purpose of Jehu's arrival in Jezreel was, but they understood it very quickly. I'm quoting, "And when Joram saw Jehu, he said, 'Is it peace, Jehu?' He answered, 'What peace can there be so long as the harlotries and the sorceries of your mother Jezebel are so many?' Then Joram ran about and fled, saying to Ahaziah, 'Treachery, O Ahaziah!' And Jehu drew his bow with his full strength and shot Joram between the shoulders, so that the arrow pierced his heart, and he sank in his chariot. The king's body was thrown in the field of Naboth the Jezreelite, fulfilling Elijah's prophecy in 1 Kings 21, verse 19, according to which, 'And you shall say to him, Thus say Yahweh, have you killed and also taken possession? And you shall say to him, Thus says Yahweh, in the place where dogs licked up the blood of Naboth, shall dogs lick your own blood.'" Ahaziah suffered a similar fate as described in the second book of Kings, chapter 9, verses 27 and 28. When Ahaziah, the king of Judah, saw this, he fled in the direction of Bet Hagan. And Jehu pursued him and said, "Shoot him also." And they shot him in the chariot at the ascent of Gur, which is by Ibleam. And he fled to Megiddo and died there. His servants carried him in the chariot to Jerusalem and buried him in his tomb with his fathers in the city of David. Jehu continued from there to the city of Jezreel, and according to chapter 9, verses 30 to 37, Jezebel heard of it, and she painted her eyes and adorned her head and looked out of the window. And as Jehu entered the gate, she said, "Is it peace, you Zimri, murderer of your master?" And he lifted up his face to the window and said, "Who is on my side? Who?" 2 or 3 eunuchs looked out at him. He said, "Throw her down." So they threw her down, and some of her blood spattered on the wall and on the horses, and they trampled on her. Then he went in and ate and drank, and he said, "See now, to this cursed woman and bury her, for she is a king's daughter. But when they went to bury her, they found no more of her than the skull and the feet and the palm of her hands. When they came back and told him, he said, "This is the word of Yahweh, which he spoke by his servant Elijah the Tishbite. In the territory of Jezreel, the dogs shall eat the flesh of Jezebel, and the corpse of Jezebel shall be as dung upon the face of the field in the territory of Jezreel, so that no one can say, 'This is Jezebel.'" Later in the story, all the king's sons in Samaria and Jezreel are eliminated. The story emphasizes that not only were the 70 of the king's sons murdered in Samaria and their heads sent to Jezreel in sacks, according to 2nd Book of Kings, chapter 10, verse 7, but also, and I'm reading from verses 11 and then 17, Jehu slew all that remained of the house of Ahab in Jezreel, all his great men and his familiar friends and his priests, until he left him none remaining. And when he came to Samaria, he slew all that remained to Ahab in Samaria, till he had wiped them out, according to the words of Yahweh, which he spoke to Elijah. In between, 42 of Ahaziah's siblings were killed, as described in verses 13 and 14, and later so were all the prophets of Baal, all the worshippers, and all his priests, as described in verses 18 to 25. Thus, Jehu wiped out Baal from Israel, as summarized in verse 28. Does this description, which is based on the prophetic stories, reflect the true historical reality? Assyrian inscriptions provide important details about the broad historical picture of the first years after Hazael's rebellion in Aram Damascus and Jehu's ascension to the throne in Israel. From the annals of Shalmaneser III, it seems that already in 841 BCE, he conducted a military campaign against Hazael. Following the rebellion in Damascus and the dissolution, the Southern Alliance, in which Aram, Damascus, and Israel were important and significant components alongside the kingdom of Hamath, Damascus now stood alone against the Assyrians. Hazael was defeated in the battle, and the Assyrian army continued its campaign as far as Mount Carmel, where the Assyrians received the tribute of the men of Tyre, Sidon, and of Jehu, son of Omri, the king of Israel. The black obelisk described this as, "I accepted tribute from Jehu, son of Omri. Silver, gold, a golden bowl, a golden beaker, golden goblets, pitchers of gold, lead, staves of the hand of the king, and javelins." However, there is no certainty as to whether this is the tribute paid to Shalmaneser following the campaign of 841, or rather it is a tribute paid by one of the later years. In any case, the black obelisk and another Assyrian inscription also describe Shalmaneser III's last military campaign to Syria and the land of Israel, which took place in 838 BCE, through which various cities were captured in the kingdom of Aram Damascus, and the Assyrians received tribute from the neighboring kingdoms, mainly from the region of Phoenicia. However, Damascus was not captured during this campaign either, and Hazael seems to have managed to maintain his power. Immediately afterwards, Assyria withdrew from the region for many years and didn't return to conduct military campaigns across the Euphrates. Thus, Hazael was managed to survive alone against the Assyrian Empire, could have used this situation to strengthen himself, establish his power, and become, even if only briefly, the strongest power in the entire region. Later, He also managed to conquer Israel and Hamath, the two kingdoms that reconciled with the Assyrians and didn't come to his aid when he was attacked by Assyria. We will deal with this in the next chapter and we'll talk about it. The events of these years had enormous consequences for the kingdom of Israel in the following decades. The killing of Jezebel, the daughter of the king of Tyre, together with her supporters, alongside the elimination of the cult of Baal in Israel, undoubtedly led to severance of relations with Tyre. Additionally, the eradication of the royal house in Judah and the ascension of Athaliah, the last remnant of the Omride Dynasty, to the throne in Jerusalem, resulted in the severance of the ties between Israel and Judah. The rift between Israel and Aram Damascus began as early as Hazael's rise to power. The two kingdoms stood on different sides, with Aram continuing its anti-Assyrian approach, while in Israel, the anti-Assyrian Omride policy was replaced by acceptance of the Assyrian rule. Indeed, as of the campaign of Shalmaneser III in 841 BCE, the king of Israel was willing to pay tribute and accept the Assyrian yoke. However, the Assyrian withdrawal from the area a few years later, which led to an unprecedented Aramaic strengthening, clarified further the regional state of affairs, because historically, when Damascus was strong, that strength constituted an unequivocal power limit for the kingdom of Israel, which had to choose between joining a coalition with the Arameans and cooperating with them, usually against the common Assyrian enemy who was threatening from the north, and between the attempt to fight against Aram Damascus, sometimes successfully but mostly unsuccessfully. When Aram Damascus weakened, usually because of Assyrian pressure from the north, and the kingdom of Israel had a great freedom of action, and it could expand the areas of its rule mainly towards the disputed areas between Aram and Israel in the Gilead and further to the north. There is almost no reference to any of this in the biblical descriptions. Indeed, the untold story missing from the biblical text is enormous in scope and results mainly from the few sources which are mainly prophetic stories that the Deuteronomistic authors had about the northern kingdom and the problematic nature of these sources. From the historical standpoint, they are very, very problematic sources. The biblical authors seem to have had relatively limited information even about the history of the kings of Judah in the 9th century BCE until the rebellion of Athaliah and Joash's ascension to the throne. They were limited mainly to what was recorded in the kings' lists, as well as information about rebellions, murders of the kings, diseases, and few other events. But at this point, another inscription enters to the picture, which enables further examination of the nature of the sources about this period, and more broadly, the nature of the historical reconstruction. 3 fragments of Aramaic stele found in Tel Dan in 1993-1994 by the excavation expedition of the Hebrew Union College led by Avraham Biran, and which make up a significant part of this important inscription, shed new light on the events of the year 842 BCE. Contrary to the biblical description, this inscription claims that Hazael, king of Aram Damascus, the king who placed the stele at the gate of the city of Dan, fought against Joram, king of Israel, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, and he was the one who killed them. The inscription was written in Aramaic, and part of it reads as follows: "And the king of Israel entered previously into my father's land, and Hadad made me king, and Hadad went in front of me, and I departed from the 7 districts of my kingdom, and I killed powerful kings who harnessed thousands of chariots and thousands of horsemen. I killed Joram, son of Ahab, king of Israel, and I killed Ahaziah, son of Jehoram, king of the house of David. And I set their towns into ruins and turned their land into desolation. And Jehu ruled over Israel, and I laid siege upon Dan. The continuation is broken. The Dan stele is of great importance in the study of biblical history and the research of the Hebrew Bible, as it shows that the kingdom of Judah was called the House of David in the 9th century BCE, about a century after the historical David founded the dynasty of kings named after him. This follows common practice in other kingdoms of the ancient Near East, which were named after the founding king of the dynasty. This is almost contemporary evidence that David is the founder of the dynasty that reigned in Jerusalem. Historically, the course of events that emerges from the Aramaic inscription found in Tel Dan is the reinforcement of the biblical description according to which the kingdom of Judah was accompanied the kingdom of Israel in its war against Hazael. However, the main contradiction between the description in the Tel Dan inscription and the biblical text is that according to the inscription, it was Hazael who killed the two kings during a war waged against Israel and Judah, while according to the biblical description, it was Jehu, the commander of the army, who killed them both in the rebellion against the Omrides. There are two completely different historical scenarios. They differ substantially also in ascribing the source of the rebellion. Was it an internal rebellion, or was it part of a war between Aram and Israel, which might imply a rebellion sponsored by Aram? The question is critically significant to our understanding of the historical sources and considering their importance and reliability. Various scholars have taken different positions on this question, spanning from supporting the reliability of the biblical text to supporting the reliability of the inscription from Tel Dan. Between these poles, some have proposed harmonizing solutions that try to combine these two sources and claim that Hazael struck the kingdom of Israel and Judah but didn't kill actually the two kings, or that Jehu did indeed kill both the kings, but Hazael attributed the killing to himself because Jehu was a protege or ally. Yet, despite these solutions, it is necessary to reiterate the very problematic nature of the prophetic sources, which are always focused on the actions of the prophets, have a legendary character, and do not require an accurate presentation of the facts that and the course of events. These stories were also transmitted orally for many years among the groups of supporters and admirers of the prophets, and when they were written down, great changes were made to them. And even while they were being integrated into the Deuteronomistic historiographic work, additional changes were made in them, and they were subordinated to the historiographical and conceptual line of the broad composition. In conducting historical research and comparing a legendary source of this kind to an inscription written close to the occurrence of the event, even if we assume that the inscription reflects the position of the victorious king and presents the story according to his ideological line, still the course of events are likely to be more reliably preserved there in the inscription than in the later rendering of the prophetic source. Given this starting point, I adopt Professor Nadav Naaman's proposal and assume that Hazael defeated the armies of Israel and Judah and killed both kings on the battlefield. Following the death of Joram, king of Israel, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, Jehu's rebellion broke out, during which the massacre in Israel and Samaria took place, and the line of Omride kings was destroyed. Over time, the historical memory blurred, and the killing of the kings got mixed up with the memory of Jehu's rebellion, so that as part of the rebellion, the killing of the two kings is also recounted. This explanation also sheds light on the prophet Elisha's role in the rebellion's outbreak. Although the prophetic stories attribute the start of the rebellion to the prophet, we might assume that this mainly reflects a Deuteronomistic literary model that is also known from the stories about the anointing of kings by the prophets Samuel and Achiah, while in practice the defeat in the war against the Arameans could serve as a better explanation. Thus, the origin of the outbreak of the rebellion can be attributed to the army's stay away from the capital and the king, and to political moves that occur among the army leaders during such periods. This was the background for the coups of Baasha and Zimri, as well as for the rise of Omri. Such a reconstruction of the historical course of events can also answer the question of why a rebellion broke out in Israel against a strong and successful dynasty of kings, which brought prosperity to the kingdom and its inhabitants, and how the dynasty was destroyed so quickly. Although the alliance with Aram Damascus ceased to exist and the Arameans attacked Israel in Ramoth Gilead, where the Israelite army was on alert for a second Aramean attack, Israel remained at a full military strength. The alliance with Judah continued to exist, and the Judean army was there to help. There is no evidence that the inter-kingdom dynamics and the military situation was the background for the coup. It is possible that the military defeat to Aram Damascus and the killing of the two kings surfaced a widespread resistance to the house of Omri, and this point can certainly be reconstructed based on the prophetic story. The later suggests that the main resistance was to the royal house, where Jezebel's standing had strengthened. Baal cult had penetrated. Testimonies surface of arrogance of the royal house, alongside social and economic injustices. And perhaps indeed the Naboth's vineyard affair and the killing of him and his sons caused unrest among broad circles in the nation, encouraged by prophets who refused to accept foreign cult. Potentially, the agitation stemmed from the northern valleys and the area of the Gilead, from where came the two prophets, Elijah the Tishbite and Elisha, who came from Abel Mecholah. The conspiracy against Joram was forged in Ramoth Gilead, and it was led by Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, from the Nimshite family, which originates in the Beit Shean Valley. Indeed, it may have been in these eastern regions that the opposition to the royal house in Samaria emerged. And if so, perhaps we can understand the great cruelty that characterized this rebellion, which was perceived, remembered, and understood in Israel as bloodthirsty. And so, for example, in Hosea chapter 1 verse 4, the prophet is commanded to name his son, newly born to a wife of harlotry, by the name Jezreel. And the explanation for the name is, I'm quoting, "For yet a little while, and I will punish the house of Jehu for the blood of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel." And in the second book of Kings, chapter 6, verse 32, Elisha calls the king of Israel this murderer. I consider the description of the dramatic events of the year 842 BCE, which had enormous consequences for the kingdom of Aram Damascus, Israel, and Judah, and were also the beginning of a new period, which we will discuss in the next chapter, to be amongst the best example of an untold story. This is because the information the narrator had was so problematic, limited, and inaccurate that although the biblical historiographers tried to offer a well-founded and reliable picture, the description is very far from the reality that we can reconstruct based on reliable primary sources such as the Assyrian inscriptions and the Tel Dan stele. These sources, while not free from problems either, can help us reconstruct an alternative image to the one presented in the biblical descriptions, and through that perspective return to examine the biblical descriptions and raise new questions and doubts. In the next chapter, we will deal with the days of the Nimshai dynasty, and especially the final peak era of the kingdom of Israel during the reign of Jeroboam II in the first half of the 8th century BCE, on the eve of the kingdom's rapid decline towards destruction. See you in the next chapter.